Masechet Brachot, the 9th chapter, Perek HaRoeh. We are on page 56, and this is a return. Although someday this class will take its place with all the others, and you're just keep scrolling straight through from class to class. But here, in the live iteration, for those who are joining us in person and those who are joining online, we are returning to study Masechet Brachot. We've been learning about dreams. And to be sure, this is the 32nd consecutive class on the 9th chapter of Masechet Brachot, Perek HaRoeh. And this is the 18th Chai on dreams specifically. Both numbers are quite meaningful. 32 is Leiv, Lamed Beis, Chai is Zum Leben, as they say. Life, anyway, but that has nothing to do with anything. But we're going to be beginning a new, like a new series of narratives, new series in this episode. But it's very, very much connected to the things that we've learned prior. And I want to highlight one detail of something that we've learned prior. And Be'ezrat Hashem, with God's help, as we make our way through this Gemara, I intend to point out a number of other things that we've learned previously and how this narrative or this series of dramatic events and confrontations between Bar Haddaya and between Abaye and Rava sheds light on the concepts and ideas that we learned about before. So first of all, this is it's not even connected to the Gemara, but I think it's important to clear. We're going to be talking about the three main figures over the course of the next bunch of episodes. There's going to be a man named Bar Haddaya and two of the greatest sages of all time, known as Abaye and Rava. No. Rava is not Bar Haddaya. Rava is known as Nachmani.
Oh, they're contemporaries though, right?
These three are contemporaries. They're living in the same time. They're living in the same place. You know, in the Steinsaltz edition of Adin Even Yisrael suggests that the dreams that we're going to be talking about took place over a number of years, but the Gemara puts it together. I don't know how he knows that, but I didn't see any Mefarshim that clearly say that, but he was an insightful enough Talmudist that if he says it, I'll accept it. That this is like many things in Torah literature. What happens is that we kind of look back, and hindsight is 20/20. And there was a number of things that happened, and at the time you don't realize what's going on. But oftentimes, like history, when you look back at history, all of a sudden a pattern starts to emerge, and we'll put it together. Even historically, we'll sew a number of narratives because now it's clear as to how things unfolded or went down and why the end results were so. Specifically speaking, and this is an important detail. We're studying Torah tonight. And every single detail in Torah is relevant for posterity. And relevant for posterity means that if we are to study Torah properly, it will change our life today. It will give us a better understanding of what's going on in the world today. It will help us understand our own selves, and we'll be more effective in life for our study of Torah. And almost all ideas of Torah are going to be applicable in one way, shape, or form. Sometimes on a halachic level, very literal, and sometimes, by virtue of clarity and guidance, where we have a better understanding of things because of the Torah that we study. When we hear about a man whose name was Bar Haddaya, a historical figure who lives like 18 centuries ago or 17 centuries ago, when you hear the stories of Abaye and Rava, if the Gemara records this, you bet your bottom dollar there's a good reason for this. These are not just little episodes in somebody's life. And the very fact that this took place over a number of years, and it starts a certain way, and it ends a very certain way, as we'll see, is going to be meaningful and instructive. So that's a preface. It's an important preface. Preface number 2. Abaye and Rava are two of the greatest sages of all time. This is, in fact, when sometimes people want to say they're learning Gemara, like euphemistically, especially in Poland, they used to say, "What are you doing?" They said, "Abaye and Rava." Abaye and Rava, that's what they're doing. That's what you say in Poland. Abaye and Rava. Abaye and Rava is like saying that that's where we're learning Gemara. They became like almost the paradigm of Talmud is Abaye and Rava. But who's Bar Haddaya? So we know Abaye and Rava, very important. Who's Bar Haddaya? So there is a school of thought that says, well, Bar Haddaya, he must be some very important Jewish person. He must have been a great sage. He must have been very intuitive. He must have had some kind of special powers. He must be a holy guy. And in fact, there's a sefer called Torah Samoyim, and he says that Bar Haddaya is mentioned in the Gemara a number of times as asking questions and being involved in the conversations of the Torah. So that must be Bar Haddaya. But the Sages Abaye that he disputes this entirely, and I want to read to you how we know he disputes this, because the Sages Abaye, he says in what we call Tanoim va'Amoraim. So he goes through, it's like written encyclopedically. He says Ois Hey, letter Hey. He starts off with Ben Hey, and then he goes to Bar Haddaya, and he has 2 entries for Bar Haddaya. And the first entry for Bar Haddaya cites a Gemara in Masechet Gittin, where there's a question of arranging a get in front of Rabbi Ache, and Bar Haddaya around. So he's there, Kamei de Rabachoi, so he must be a sage, right? And then there's a Gemara that in Masechet Chulin that speaks about Reb Ami HaKoyen, that in Tiberia he saw on Chol HaMoed that people were washing, they were doing the laundry, and he protested. And Bar Haddaya is right in the middle of that. He's right in the middle of that argument. He's part of that discussion. And he's mentioned in Masechet Sukkah. So they say, oh, you see, like he must be Jewish. Yeah, except that the Sages Abaye has Bar Haddaya and then a second Bar Haddaya. 2 entries. And in the second Bar Haddaya, he says simply, Potzer Chalomos Bizman Abaye and Rava. He was a dream interpreter in the time of Abaye and Rava. And you have to know that dream interpretation was an important part of culture and life in antiquity. There's even a Greek word for a dream interpreter, Oni Kreider or something. I forgot the word. But there's a word for it which is based on exactly this. And it doesn't seem that he's Jewish. It does not seem that Bar Haddaya is Jewish. He was a gifted man, and he knew how to do certain things. And this is like an important little detail. We're not talking about holiness. We're not talking about a person who was able to understand things and know things by virtue of what we call Ruach HaKodesh, a higher sensory, or because he was very close to Hashem. He had a certain clairvoyance. And there is such a thing. There is some people who have an additional sense.
Isn't that a gift from God?
It's a gift from God, but you don't have to be Jewish, and it has nothing to do with holiness. Gifts from God are not indicative of holiness because they're gifts. And holiness is something you have to work for, as a rule. Righteousness and holiness are things that you work for. You're not born righteous. You're not born a tzaddik. You're born with the potential to become a great tzaddik. Just like nobody is born a gold medalist. People are born with athletic potential, but they're not born excellent at anything. You have to develop excellence. You have to use your natural gifts, natural abilities to be able to achieve something great. So this is important for us to understand. Now, Bar Haddaya, who had this clairvoyance, was able to be somehow aware of like deeper meanings. He had an intuition. I want you to know, I once heard this from Rabbi Shachat. He told me that when he was a very young man, he met somebody who seemed to be like clairvoyant. They had like an awareness. They had a sense about other people. And this person came to Rabbi Shachat and said things, and Rabbi Shachat was a little freaked out about it. So he called his uncle, who was the Rebbe's private secretary, Rabbi Chodakov. And Rabbi Chodakov was an extremely august individual, very illustrious individual, very, very spiritually accomplished and extremely disciplined and very, very, very learned. And Rabbi Chodakov, he said to Rabbi Chodakov, this is like crazy stuff. This person has like a how do they know these things? And Rabbi Chodakov simply said to him, Es ist Faran Azazach. There's something like this. There's some people who have intuition. It's like some people have it. Some people have a knack. Some people have a natural charisma. Some people know how to push other people's buttons. Some people know how to sell. People have a gift. It's a gift. So there's a sixth sense sometimes. There's a clairvoyance. And it seems that Bar Haddaya was such a person. Okay, so with this little preface, that doesn't make Bar Haddaya a good guy. In fact, he's not a good guy. He's a corrupt guy. He's a corrupt guy. So why are we talking about him, and why is that story relevant? Why do we have to sew together a bunch of narratives of Abaye and Rava? Why would Abaye and Rava even talking to him?
Because he did have that verse.
Because, and this is the key element that I want to focus on for now. The key element I want to focus on for now is that one of the things that we have learned, insofar as dreams and their meaning in our lives, is that things follow the way the dream is articulated. Hakol hulach achar hapeh, we learned. It has to be verbalized. It means it has to be interpreted, and the interpretation has to be verbalized. And the verbalization serves as a vehicle of actualization. As the expression goes, a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, be careful with the words you use. It's a real thing. There's a certain power in words. And when people use words a certain way, or people say things a certain way, it could make a difference. We have to be careful with our words. We shouldn't say things, especially negative things, because it could have an effect. And when it comes to dreams, specifically, it is the articulation that brings forth the possibilities in this world. In modern language, it downloads it. So it could remain distant, or it could be brought into this world, and verbalization is a key ingredient. This is the way, incidentally, we understand the story of Yosef, when he comes to his brothers, and he says, I had a dream. And they're like, yeah? Really, what was he dreaming about? And Yosef says, well, we were out there in the field, and we were collecting, and your bundles are bowing to my bundles. And the brother's like, huh? So you think we're going to bow to you, huh? Is that what you think? And Yaakov says to Yosef, what are you doing? It's bad enough you have these dreams. Like, don't tell them about it. Why do you have to? Why did Yosef tell them about it? Was he's looking to pick a fight? Because Yosef knew the dream is real, but he needed somebody to interpret the dream. And they were the unwitting messengers. Without even realizing it, they interpreted the dream. Yosef said, aha, very good. Exactly what I thought that meant, and I needed you to say that. So why didn't Yaakov say it? So it says, Aviv shamar es hadavar. His father, he said, he kept it close. And there's a medrash, and I shared this in one of the previous episodes. He wrote it down. The medrash says he wrote it down. Ba'osei yom, ba'osei shah, which day, which hour. He's writing it in his diary. And so the Rebbe asks, what is this medrash? Shomer es hadavar. Okay, it's mamten. Rashi says, mamten u'mitzapeh. He anticipated the fulfillment. He wanted to see it happen. Because Yaakov understood that Yosef will lead the Jewish people to greatness. He understood that.
The dreamer tells of his dream, and somebody interprets it. That's
Correct.
What you're talking about.
Correct.
I've learned this, Gemara. This is not what this is talking about. This is talking about someone that says, you're going to have this dream. And
No. The dreams, they come with dreams. Abaye and Rava come with dreams to Bar Haddaya. And Bar Haddaya interprets the dreams. But the corrupt element is that Bar Haddaya would interpret the dreams by virtue of how much you paid him for it. What if you pay?
Sounds like a bad thing. Sounds like a good business.
It's a good business. Okay. Well, we'll talk about that. We'll see how good of a business it was. Huh? Well, when you sell insurance, nobody wants the insurance to get paid. Not the one who's selling the insurance, not the one who's getting the insurance. So everybody's paying, and nobody wants to actually make the claim. So the Rebbe explains that Yaakov Avinu wrote it because sometimes writing is like speaking. If Yaakov didn't want to say it, he didn't want to upset the brothers, he didn't want to create more friction in the family, but he wanted to write it because writing it is a form of articulation, a form of actualization. Okay, so this Bar Haddaya, who seems to have like this like we said, this extraordinary talent or extraordinary ability, is the one who is going to be interpreting the dreams, and therefore he is a central figure. And the fact that Abaye and Rava took him seriously, these are the greatest sages, they took him seriously. They were not known to be miracle workers per se, although there's a lot of paranormal things going on around Abaye and Rava, but this is it's a part of life. Dreams are a part of our reality. And the fact that they came to Bar Haddaya is significant. So let me share with you what the Ben Yehoyada says. The Ben Yehoyada lives about 130 years ago. He said like this. He says, it seems to me, by the grace of God, he says, Nira li b'siyat dishmaya. Kol poter chalomot amiti ze nigzer alav b'hiyoto tipa. Anybody who really has the ability to interpret dreams, he has such an ability, you should know that it was as part of his DNA from the moment of conception. It's an inherent thing. It's not a learned talent. So if you have it, you have it. And if you don't, you don't. And you can't learn this. This is not something that a person is able to have, that a person can grasp it to go to school to learn how to interpret dreams. Bar Haddaya, this guy Bar Haddaya, kach havale, he had this ability, shegozer alav HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'yeseh tipa, when he was just what we call an embryo, a drop. God said he is going to have the ability to grasp and understand the truth about the dreams. He has the ability. Umin hashamayim hinichu lo bilvavo la'asot davar zeh. How did he realize he has this ability? I don't know. But at some point, he just realized he had this ability. There are people, at least one person that I know who is somewhat clairvoyant, who tells me things that are very strange, because I know what Rabbi Shachat said from Rabbi Chodikov, so I don't get nervous with it. And they say to me, they wish they didn't have this gift. but they have this gift. It's a strange thing, but it's just unusual. It's paranormal, but there is such a thing. There's I shared this with you before, but I'm going to share it. I'm going to make a point. I'm using this is really like a metaphor. Years ago, to one of the Chabad dinners, they brought like a child prodigy, a pianist. His name was Ethan Bortnick. I'm going to guess he's probably about 20 years old today or 25, and either he became a real superstar or he turned into a black hole. But when he was like 7 or 8 years old, he could play like the most difficult pieces of classical music. He was like a genius. And the story went, how did they discover? He composed his own music. It was like crazy stuff. And I saw the kid play. It wasn't normal what he was doing on the piano. I never saw an adult play like that. And what happened was that his parents took him out to Toys R Us one night of Hanukkah, and they brought him a little piano. It was a gift, like a Hanukkah gift. That was they brought him. And the mother was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and she hears a kid playing a tune. So, and he was like 4 years old or something. So she said, wow, I didn't realize that thing came with pre-recorded tunes. So she came out to see which button he was pressing, and he was playing this little piano. And she said, how do you know how to do that? He said, I don't know, I just tried. And he literally figured it out by himself. Now, what would have happened if he wouldn't have gotten that piano? I don't know. At some point in his life, he probably would have discovered he had this talent. And once he knew he had this talent, he'd be able to use it. You're born with a talent like that. You can't learn how to do that. You can learn how to play piano in a mediocre fashion. You cannot become the greatest pianist of your day unless you have a natural aptitude or a predisposition and a gift. This is the same kind of thing. The Ben Yehoyada says he had this gift. Min Shemayim. And that's what people say about Bar Haddaya is not a good guy. He's not a good guy. How can he know how to do these things? And the answer is, whether he's a good guy or not is irrelevant. He's a talented guy. It doesn't say it's not holy. It's not close to Hashem. It doesn't make him spiritually elevated. It just means he has a gift. That's all. The Bar Haddaya had this gift. And the Ben Yehoyada says, in that case, so why was Rava angry at him? Rava gets very angry at him later, because Rava, by the way, doesn't like paying for his dream interpretation. Abaye pays, Rava doesn't. Abaye gets all beautiful interpretations, and Rava gets terrible interpretations.
He pays him nothing,
But he got paid. Right? He wants to get paid. So why did he get so angry? So what was Bar Haddya's shtick? If he saw. Why did he? What did it make a difference if you pay or didn't pay? So the Ben Yehoyada says this. He says that he saw things in a dream, and he chose to emphasize or harp on one detail or the other detail. There's positive elements and negative elements, and he would see them both. And depending on if you paid him, that would make him see the positive elements. Now, I just want to say, in his defense, even though he's not a good guy, and you'll soon hear why, in his defense, most people, if you pay them, they will look at things differently. It's just a fact. It's like when people are not getting paid for what they're doing, they're like, I'm doing you a favor anyway. What do you want from me? And bribery, unfortunately, works. It's just a matter of fact. So when Qatar is dropping millions of dollars all over the place, all of a sudden everybody's heads are turning and they're changing their minds. Well, what do you think? The Gemara tells us that Sheikhad Yaver, that the Gemara tells us that bribery works. It works. It's a part of us that we can't even control it. The Gemara tells us a story of one of the sages who was afforded a certain level of honor or comfort, and he said, "Why are you being nice to me like this?" And the guy said, well, we have this court tomorrow, and you're sitting on the bench. And he said, I'm on the bench, and you're like a defendant or plaintiff? And he said, yeah, well, I'm not on the bench anymore. And the next day, he had come across the Kinneret. He came to Tiberia for this. Next day, he came to the courthouse because they had to scramble to find a new judge. And he was listening to the arguments, and his mind was working the whole time and what this guy should have said. So you can't control it. You can't control it. It's like people say, why can't you take the bribe, and then we'll judge the on its merits. You can't. Torah says it's not possible. Once you get paid, it's simply impossible. I'll tell you an amazing story about a great man in the Chabad world who passed away a few years ago. His name is Melech Tzvibel, Zechan Levracha. He was one of the senior mashpiyim, and he's a tremendous goren in Torah, tremendous goren, and a very, very pious individual. And my father told me that there was a din Torah, my father's amongst other things, he takes care of the Vader Bar Lubavitch and oversees putting together the din Torah, when you have to deal with serious communal issues. And so they wanted the Melech Tzvibel to sit on the Bezin. He was a tremendous goren in every part of Torah. And the Melech said, obviously he didn't want to do it. These are, powerful people, and one individual is powerful and vindictive. It's not a fun thing to. And they'll say, let me think about it. So he came, told my father, I decided that I can't sit as a dayan. So my father said, why? He said, because this person annually arranges a certain thing, and he says he gives me some kind of honor. The Melech was an extremely humble person. He said he gives me kavod hamaduma, this false kind of kavod, but I don't think that I can be impartial. So he refused to sit in the din Torah. He said, I don't think I could be impartial.
Even though he knew the gift was crap.
Even though it doesn't, it works. It works. Tips work. They work. So Bar Haddaya, of course he would look at things differently if you paid him. I heard a story. A guy once came to the doctor and he got a diagnosis, and he gave him diagnosed him, and he gave him a prescription. And he comes back to the doctor a few weeks later, and his doctor says, your check bounced. He said, yeah, I know, and my cold is back. Right? But what was the issue with Bar Haddaya? So the Ben Yehoyada says the issue with Bar Haddaya was that he didn't have to see it so bad. He didn't have to verbalize in the worst way possible. Even if he saw something negative, there's sometimes you see something negative, you don't have to spell it out like that. And he said the fact that he spelled it out and he found it wasn't just like accidental, that it was all choreographed and it was premeditated, that's why he got very angry at him, and Bar Haddaya doesn't have a good ending in the end. Anyway, the bottom line is that this is a real thing, whether we understand it or don't understand it, it's a real thing. And the Gemara is telling this to us in order to demonstrate and make this point. So with no further ado, Daf Nun Vav, we are about, 10 lines down. The line begins with the word Yoma. If you're following the art school version, it's probably 96, A1 probably still. 56, pardon me. 56, A1. And the Gemara begins like this. Introduces us to the man of the hour. Bar Haddaya Mefashar Chelmei Hava. Bar Haddaya was a person who used to explain dreams. That was his thing. Okay. So, man dahave the yohiv le agra, the person who would give him payment, mefashar le lemal yusa. He would interpret the dream in a positive way. Uman de lo yohiv le agra, and the person who wouldn't pay him, mefashar le ligri usa. He would explain the dream for him in a negative way. He would interpret it in a negative fashion. And the truth is that Bar Haddaya was not necessarily the one who was calling the shots or making things happen, but he was moving things along. And because he would point out one way or the other way, that would help actualize. And he did this because he wanted to get paid well. As somebody just said before, he was a good businessman. He was looking for the money. So the Gemara tells us, fine, Bar Haddaya is a renowned fellow. He does this. Sorry? Why does he interpret dreams if he's not getting paid? That's an interesting question. Maybe a person could say somebody has a gift. You have a gift, so you use your gift. You help other people. It's a good question. I don't know why he would or wouldn't, but the fact is he did.
Well, the whole incentive was to get paid.
That's for sure. His incentive was to get paid, but he couldn't force people to pay him. So the Gemara says the following, and the Gemara is going to demonstrate how powerful this is, because the Gemara is going to show us that the great sages had the same dream, and Bar Haddaya would interpret it differently for each one.
Forgive me.
Yeah.
If they had the same dream, why didn't just Rava, who paid him, get his interpretation and give his interpretation to Abaye?
It's an excellent question. I'm going to repeat it for the benefit of our online viewers. Michael's asking, why didn't one go and just get the interpretation? Good question. Good question. So we're going to talk about this in a minute.
Okay.
It's a good question. There's other questions that we have to answer first, like how do two people have the same dream again and again and again? Okay, but like, why would they have the same dream again and again? We talked about it. This is not a tzaddik thing. This is like in the real world. And I want you to know that there's something uncanny with dreams, especially the last few days. I had a lot of strange things with dreams. A non-Jewish fellow came and told me a story that his brother, who lives in a different continent, had a dream that a rabbi from a certain place came to him and told him something. And I'm specifically leaving it vague. I'm not going into the details. And he said he went online and he found out that there is a rabbi in this place with that name. He Googled him and he said, I think I recognize that guy. It's this story happened a few days ago.
Really?
Yeah, this guy is not Jewish. And he called me, he says, okay, you're a rabbi. What's to do with this? I don't know. Sorry, I told him in the meantime to reach out to him. Let his brother reach out to him. And somebody called me today with a very, very strange dream, having seen something very strange. So I made a suggestion, what I think it might possibly mean, where a person that they never saw before, and all of a sudden they bump into him and today, told him something about a part of his Yiddishkeit doesn't seem to be in order. I said, well, check those things out. I guess we'll see what happens. I can't explain this. The Alter Rebbe says in one of his Maimar Maktarim that there's something about a dream that is entirely inexplicable. We don't really understand how this works. It's a part of the human condition, and it is not simply, as Freud would have it, just the overactive mind. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. And I talked about that in previous episodes. And we'll come back to that. Sometimes dreams could be real. And we see here from Abaye and Rava that dreams could be real. The blessing of the Kohen. We went through that a few episodes ago. And another last little detail. One of the things we learned earlier, and it's going to be emphasized here. One of the things we learned earlier is that it's not possible to dream about something that you didn't think about at some point. That doesn't mean that the dream is simply a rehashing of something you thought about. It means that you have to have the characters or the imagination of a certain thing that you heard, but the message coming to you is coming to you couched in those figures. It's couched in those memories. It's couched in that frame. It doesn't mean that you're simply rehashing something that you saw. For example, if you'll have a dream and you speak English, you're probably going to be hearing the words in English. That doesn't mean that if you spoke French or if you spoke Hebrew, that it would be a different kind of dream. Obviously, it's going to be in a language you know, a language you understand. So it's going to be within characters or things that you saw. But the message doesn't have to be one and the same. And this will, by the way, Michael, answer part of your question, as we'll see. So Abaye and Rava have this dream, and the Gemara says they seem to have come to Bar Haddaya. Abaye yohev lezuza. Abaye gives him gives him a payment, gives him a zuz. Rava lo yoav lei. Rava doesn't give him. Omri lei, they said to him, Akrinon b'chelmin. It was read to us in our dream. Now, read to us in a dream means there was some kind of narration. They heard these words being narrated in the dream. They heard these words being declared, being read to them. And the words are, Shorcha tovuach le'einecha. Your ox is slaughtered in front of your eyes. Now, this is a verse, this is a pasuk that comes to us from the Tochacha. It comes to us from the string of rebuke or curses that we get in Parshat Ki Tavo, where Moshe Rabbeinu repeats 98 curses if we will not follow the ways of the Torah. And the rest of the verse, and now it says, the Gemara says Vigomer, etc., which means that they actually heard the whole verse. Because etc. means Vigomer, etc. What is the rest of the verse? The rest of the verse is Velo tochal mimenu. So if your ox is slaughtered before you, what's wrong with that? Well, nothing. But if your ox is slaughtered and you don't get to eat it, that could be a problem.
Benefit.
Right?
You don't benefit.
So tochal could mean eat or benefit, because eating is a euphemism for benefit. So this is the dream that they had. They heard these words being read out at the same time. So the question is asked, how is it possible for them both to have had the same dream at the same time? The Mefarshim actually talk about this. And they say, Abaye and Rava could have been in Shul on the same week. And they heard these words being read from the Torah at the same time. So this was already in their mind. Clearly a message was being given to them, but it's not unlikely that they were in Shul that Shabbos. Or that this was a pasuk that was being learned in the yeshiva, and they were there together. So they happened to learn the same thing. They heard the same thing. There was a lecture delivered on that pasuk. They heard that pasuk. That pasuk was in their mind, and therefore they came along and they had this this dream. So they wanted now to have it interpreted. So what does Bar Haddaya say? So he said like this. To Rava, who didn't pay him, he said, Psid iskach. Psid iskach, Rashi says, means tiskalkel prakmatya shulcha. Your business is going to pot. Your business is going to go down. That's what you're looking at. You will not be able to eat out of frustration or depression. It's sad. This means you'll have no appetite. Now Rashi says means out of your pain, lo yitam loch. It won't taste. The food won't have a taste to you. No food will have a taste to you. This is not a description of COVID from 22 centuries ago. This means that when people have no appetite, nothing, they become, everything is tasteless. Depression. You'll be depressed because you lose all your money, you go bankrupt, and you can't bring yourself to eat. He doesn't say you're not going to eat at all, because if a person doesn't eat, he's going to die. He doesn't say you're going to die of starvation. He says you will lose your appetite. And that's how bad it's going to be. And that's what shorcha tavuch, your ox is going to be slaughtered, and this is how it's going to go down. Now the Maharsha says something very interesting. I want to read to you the words of the Maharsha. Maharsha says, why is it that this business of the ox right away represents the concept of making a living or not making a living, and so on and so forth? So the Maharsha says that there is a verse that says, Rav tevuot b'koach shor. Literally, there is much harvest in the power of the ox. In modern English, horsepower. Horsepower describes the power of your car, right? Because that's how people used to, how many horses you'd need to pull the wagon, how fast it would go. So the tractors of antiquity, till very recently in fact, the last century and a half, what was the tractor? Or oxen actually. The ox was ox power. Horsepower was transportation. Ox power was when it came, so it says, Rav tvus b'koach shor, the plowing of the fields for thousands of years was done with oxen. Strong animals who put the yoke on them and they pull the plow. And it's not an easy job. So shorcha tevuach then means the idea that your business or business affairs are going to collapse. And that's the meaning shorcha tevuach. And because shorcha tevuach, and you're not going to be able to eat out of the business, meaning your business collapses, and out of that, you won't be able to eat. That's what the Marsha says. We'll come back to this. That's very interesting that he doesn't interpret this literally. The next pasuk he's going to interpret literally. Why doesn't he interpret this pasuk literally? This is an interesting question. Why? Clearly he doesn't interpret it literally, and elsewhere he does. So the Tzlach, the Noda B'Yehuda, gives a very interesting answer. He says, I'll tell you why. Because Rava did not own a farm, and because he didn't own a farm, he probably didn't own any oxen. So how could it be literal? In the next thing, when he talks about sons and daughters, Rava has sons and daughters. Sons and daughters could be interpreted literal. Here, he understood it must be euphemistic. From the very fact that he didn't have it, he knew automatically it has to be a metaphor. By the way, we have this metaphor in the Torah, very, very early on, in a dream that was had by the Pharaoh. What did the Pharaoh dream? About the famine. What did he dream? Fat cows and skinny cows. What do the fat cows and skinny cows represent? The ears of corn that come after, right? The boom and bust, but first it comes in the cows, and then it comes, and so this is the same idea, sharcha, this is the idea of the ox. So he understands that this is a euphemism, he understands that this is a metaphor.
Did Rava have a business?
Rava clearly did have a business. Right. He clearly had a business, and so did Abaye. And in general, many of the early sages refused to benefit from the Torah learning, like the Rambam. He was a physician, and he did not want to benefit in any way, shape, or form. He said, a living he'll make however he makes, and the Torah that he taught was therefore uncorrupted, and it was the halacha ruling he given. He couldn't be pushed around by anybody. And many of these people were wealthy, actually. Some of them were very poor, some of them were very wealthy. The idea that a person says, I don't want to make a living. I'm just going to study Torah all day. That's not the way it was. B'divrei Yimei Yisrael. B'divrei Yimei Yisrael, people worked very, very hard, and they studied a lot of Torah. There was a Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. Rabbi Yitzchak was a blacksmith, and he worked very hard. Blacksmith is not pretty. It's hard work. And then he studied Torah all night. When did he sleep? I don't know, but that's the thing. He did back-breaking work all day, and he studied Torah all night. And this is always how it was with Divrei Yimei Yisrael until very recently. Some would argue until after the war, and that's a discussion for another day. But this is the way it used to be, and clearly he had a business. Now, so that's the message he gets. That's the message he gets. Your business is going to go down. What does he say to Abaye? Abaye has the same exact dream. So Bar Haddaya says like this. Abaye paid. Rava didn't pay. He says, your business is going to pot. Abaye said, Marvachiskach. You're going to do really well. Your business is going to go boom, not bust. And so how does that work with Shorcha Tovuach? How does that work with this? So he says, Shorcha Tovuach means he says, you're not going to eat because you'll be so happy. You'll be satisfied. You won't have to eat. What does this mean? So Rashi says, Mitoch simchasach, you're going to be so delighted, he says you won't even want to eat. So of course both of them ate. Abaye eats and Rava eats. If you don't eat, you die, obviously. But the question is, when you're eating, are you eating because you have to eat, or are you eating because you're looking for comfort? Food is a comfort thing. That's when people, when they go through bad times, they usually put on extra pounds. Why? Because they're looking for comfort. They lose a relationship, they gain 20 pounds. Why? Food is a comfort thing. You can't have a relationship with a plate of spaghetti. But people think that they'll feel a little bit better. And it does give a temporary release of serotonin. You know, when I learned this Gemara, I always think of the words of Rabbi Yitzchak Berditchev. Rabbi Yitzchak Berditchev was a very holy man who experienced Yiddishkeit like it was an experiential thing for him. Like he really got excited from mitzvahs. You know, like if the sermon went into overtime, he would be as excited as the fans when hockey goes into overtime. Like he's that kind of person. He experienced everything in a very real, enthusiastic way. So Rabbi Yitzchak Berditchev once said like this. He said, there's 2 days a year when you're not allowed to eat. On Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur. And he said they're almost the same, but entirely different. He said, on Tisha B'Av, you feel such misery, who can bring himself to eat? Who can bring himself to eat? And he said, in Yom Kippur, there's such joy, who wants to eat? That was Rabbi Yitzchak Berditchev. He was not hungry on either of the days. Why? Because on Tisha B'Av, he felt the Churban Beis HaMikdash. He couldn't bring himself to eat, even if he was allowed to. And Yom Kippur didn't want to eat. So this is this Gemara. Rashi doesn't say he's not going to eat. He says, lo yitam. You'll eat, but it will have no taste. The food will be tasteless. It'll be like chewing sandpaper. And he says to Abaye, you won't have a desire to eat. It's not going to take away. So Yitzi is asking online, but how is tavuach now a good thing? And the answer is, go and try to eat an ox when he's alive. Try to put an ox on the barbecue. It's not going to work. So in order to eat, if you want to have kosher meat, what do you need to do? You need to shecht it. Okay. So here he says, Sheicha tavuach, the ox is slaughtered. However, v'lei seichel, you don't even want to eat it. In other words, the barbecue's fired up. Everything's ready. It's ready. Okay, fine. There's no interest. Usually when people are hungry and the barbecue's going, everybody's excited about it. He says, lei seichel. You'll eat. In the end, you'll eat. And that's why, I don't know where you were reading from. It may be translated as benefit because there was no desire for it. He says, you'll be doing so well, everything will be so fantastic, you won't even have a desire. You know, it's like a lot of, sometimes when you're at a very joyous frame of mind, you even forget to eat. Well, you even realize it, I didn't even need anything tonight. Because you're so happy. You make a simcha, whatever else it is. So this is the way it gets interpreted. One is very positive, and one is extremely negative. Now, the Rishonim,
Both same outcome.
but it's like literally the same pasuk. And one is boom, and one is bust. So the Rishonim are very, very disturbed by this whole thing. The Rishonim are very disturbed. In fact, the Tosfos HaRosh says like this. Even though they were seeing the same pasuk, I would say for that matter, hearing the same pasuk, but this is Perek HaRoeh, and dreams are generally seen, not heard. Or you, in your mind, in what you're seeing, you think you're hearing. So he says, even though they're seeing the same verse, interesting use the words of seeing. He says, nonetheless, he came up with a different reason. And he was able to show them how the same verse could mean different things. The fact that they dreamt this verse is because they heard the verse, or they had studied this verse. That was the verse in their head. The question is, what did it mean to you? What did it mean to you? Now, in order to appreciate what the Tosfos HaRosh is saying, it's helpful to take a look in the Ritva. Because the Ritva spells out the question. Tosfos HaRosh just gives the answer. He says, af al pi, even though the Ritva spells the question out. The Ritva says like this. We're talking, this is Rishonim. He says, Tema. This is astonishing. For heaven's sake. They both had the same exact dream. Not just the same dream, it's the same verse, the same pasuk. I mean, this guy's really creative. How could he do that with a straight face? How could you tell a person they have the same dream? And like you asked Michael, they have the same dream, so let him come and, one will get the interpretation and that's it. So he says two things. Number one, the first answer that Ritva gives is, Efsher, it's possible. Who says that they knew they had the same dream? And who says that they heard the same things? They came together, but they had separate sessions. Oh. It was an anonymous session. Now, of course, this is a little bit hard to understand because later on it says, Ozol Rava l'chudei. Later on in the Gemara it says Rava came alone. So if Rava came alone, then it sounds like they were together. So the Ritva says, Lav lememra de meikara yishem kecha. Doesn't mean that they had the same session. They sat in the waiting room together. They didn't have the same private session. That's number one. And he said, the Ritva understands that this is a little bit of a stretch because the Gemara says they came together. And they probably compared notes. Right. And they probably knew what they were saying. So therefore the Ritva gives another answer. Oid efsher, he says, it's not what was said, it's how it was received. I'm going to repeat that. It's not what was said, it's how it was received. Two people can hear the same thing and they take very different messages. And it could even be intended as very different messages. Because that's the nature. People experience things by the frame of their own common experiences. Everything we experience within the framework of what we've experienced in the past. And therefore, something can trigger you and make you very uncomfortable, and not trigger me or make me uncomfortable at all. Why? Because we have different past experiences.
Isn't that I want to know the Rabbi when he heard his father say the Brachot?
Excellent. That's an excellent example. That's an excellent example, and there's a lot to talk about that. That's in Hayom Yom. That when the Mittler Rebbe was a boy, he heard the Tochacha, he heard these verses, and he became so sick from listening to these verses. He was 12-year-old boy. His birthday is in Kislev. That his father didn't know if he'll be able to fast on Yom Kippur. So they said to him, like you hear the Torah reading every year. He was a very pious little boy, right? He was very observant. He was there every year. Why did it affect you so badly? Because usually the Alter Rebbe used to read the Torah himself. Because the Alter Rebbe was very medactic, everything should be precise, and he didn't trust anybody else with reading the Torah, reading exactly as it should be read. So he read it himself. So he says, the Tata Lane, to my father reads, I don't hear the curses. I hear it differently. But the thing is, it's not really a good example, Nathan, because over there, it's a difference the way it was said. And here, it's a difference the way it was received. Right? But maybe there's a little bit of commonality over there. But
isn't the proof in the pudding? I mean, ultimately, what really transpired?
Well, this is the big question, and this is what we're going to wrestle with and try to figure out, Bezrat Hashem, during the course of these few episodes in the Gemara. Does Bar Haddaya really get to decide how things happen?
Of course not.
It doesn't make any sense. So then why is Rava angry at him, and why does he curse him, or why does he have a bad end?
It's like a programming. He puts it in your mind. He interprets it for you. He programs, it's going to be bad. And you start thinking, it's going to be bad.
So do you decide your own fate? Or is there something real going on over here? This is the bigger question. Let's absorb this Gemara, let's digest it. We're going to have to figure this out. This is one of the big things we have to figure out. Now, the Ritva says a very important thing here. Very, very important thing. He says, Veheim, Abaye and Rava, the greatest sages. Veheim, shalehayu yoidim b'chachma zeis. They didn't know this art. They didn't have this art. It's an art. They didn't have it. Right. So therefore, hayachayshvim zeh, that's what they thought. They thought it has nothing to do with Bar Haddya's decision. It has to do with the truth. And the truth, it could change according to the person. So therefore, they went to Bar Haddaya. But later on, they found out Bar Haddaya does have something to do with it. Now, in the words of one of the later Achronim who explains this, he says like this. He says that there's a concept of a person experiencing something in accordance with their particular mazel. Everybody has a mazel. Everybody has a destiny. And you experience something according to your destiny, not according to somebody else's destiny. And therefore, the same words could be experienced differently. So, for example, the Magid Taluma points out to something that the Tosfos says earlier. There's a Tosfos that says the following. And we actually learned this Tosfos together. The Tosfos says that the mazel, there's a question over there was 24 Pesach Halemis in Yerushalayim, and the Rabbeinu Yitzchak said like this: the mazel shas haleda gorim. Very similar to what we learned from the Ben Yehuda. He says the mazel of the interpreter has a direct impact. And this is not something which is totally b'chachma. It's not something which is about smarts or learning how to do something. It's an intuitive thing. It's a natural thing. So their assumption was that just as their mazel, this is an art, and somebody has a predisposition for this, there's also a predisposition in what it means for you. Because it's coming to you, so it's coming to you within your milieu. And just like we could have different experiences in life, and different experiences make us react differently, so too, spiritually, we have a different framework. And because we have a different framework, the same message, the same words, could be bringing something very different to one than it could be bringing for the other. That's basically it. I was once sitting during one of the chaplaincy meetings, and one of the non-Jewish chaplains said a very interesting thing. He shared a story. They were talking about, triggers and sensitivities, and he said that there was in his church, so he had this thing. He used to bless everybody after. He would put his hands on his head. I thought it was interesting. But he told me it's a biblical thing. He told me, I said, yeah, no. He says, the Jacob put his hand. Yeah, I know that Jacob put his hands. Yeah.
Does that mean there's an overriding, I don't know what to call it, but a potential or an influence of the muzzle plus the influence of your intellect and emotions, because you're an individual.
That is definitely true. We all are born with a certain destiny, and you cannot change your destiny per se, necessarily. Let me put it to you this way. If somebody his destiny is not to be a very smart person, no matter how hard he tries, he ain't going to be a genius. It's not going to happen. If somebody is not born athletic, he's not going to be, jumping hoops. It's not going to happen. Why? It's not your predisposition is. So in the same way we have that predisposition, there are certain people that are going to have a certain mazel. This is the mazel the way it is in their life. For example, and I know we're jumping all over the place, but this is important. They say that Rabbi Avram Ibn Ezra was extremely poor. He could never make a living. And he once joked that if he would go into the mortuary business, people would stop dying. But he didn't make a living. He said, if I made umbrellas, it would stop raining. Like nothing. There's a story in the Gemara, Masechet Tanit, of a particular sage who was so poverty-stricken, and his wife was so miserable, and she was so unhappy. She finally said, do something, pray. We don't have it's just crazy. And he says, he gets a heavenly voice says like this: if you want, I can basically destroy the world and start all over again, if that's what you want. Which means that everybody's destiny is interlocking and we're all, there's trillions of pieces. So whatever your destiny is going to be, that's going to be your destiny. And that's why people say Mazel Tov. What's Mazel Tov? We bless each other that the Mazel should be good. The Mazel should shine. There is a thing like that. This is a famous question. A famous question. And on one hand we say Ein Mazel li Yisrael. And on the other hand, there's a lot of things we do because of Mazel, including saying Mazel Tov, right? So it's a very nuanced thing. It's a very nuanced thing. Ein Mazel Yisrael means that when it comes to certain details in our destiny, that we are not compelled to have to do certain things. And Avraham Avinu is told that he can live above Mazel, and he can transcend certain limitations. Right, and we are able to live sometimes to vault beyond glass ceilings by virtue of certain mitzvahs or certain incredible things that could happen. So there is an element of that.
And the other thing is, we don't hold by negative, we don't hold it as an inevitability, a negative prophecy. This is sort of like that. Like if it's something so negative, these people are tzaddikim too.
Right. So it's funny that you're saying that. It's funny that you're saying that. No. I'll tell you. I'll tell you what's peculiar, because one of the Mefarshim actually uses the word ke'ein nevuah. I think the Ben Yehoyada uses the word ke'ein nevuah. So the thing is like this. The thing is that if somebody has a very bad dream, there's a halacha. Because if you have a very bad dream, the halacha says you should fast. And the halacha says if you have a very bad dream on Friday night, that you're allowed to fast on Shabbos. Wow. But you're not allowed to fast on Shabbos. So because it's a sin to fast on Shabbos, you have to fast after that for fasting on Shabbos. So you fast on Shabbos, and you fast because you fasted. Now, what is that? So on a very simple level, we talked about this in the previous episode, on a very simple level, it means that you're being advised of trouble ahead, and therefore fasting was an act of tshuva, an act of penance. So when something is coming your way, if you do tshuva in advance, then hopefully you can ward off something negative. Yeah? And you can ask the question, why didn't Rava do what he could do? Maybe he did. Not always does our tefillos get accepted. Not always does our tshuva work. It's not a guarantee. Sometimes that's the destiny. We don't understand Hashem's ways. Hashem's ways are a mystery. We can't understand. We see out of a gigantic screen, jumbotron screen with the trillions and trillions of pixels. We see like 5 pixels. So we see a very small part of things. We don't really get to see the big picture. When Mashiach will come, everything will make sense to us. Right now, it doesn't make sense to us because we're seeing very limited slices of reality. But you're right that there is a thing of us being able to change things. Sometimes there is such a thing. True.
Yeah, so it gets messy in my mind. If you have destiny and you have free will.
There is an it's not really a question of a paradox of destiny and free will, because destiny is I'm not destined to sin. Over that I have free will. But I am destined to be smart or not, rich or not, successful or not. That I am destined. And I can't necessarily change that destiny. So there's a story that the Friedrich Rebbe told, that a man had a dream, and in a dream, Rahman al-Litzlan, he lost a son. His son was going to die. And he went to his Rebbe. Friedrich Rebbe says, I'm not going to tell you, this is a real story, the Friedrich Rebbe says. It's a real story, with a real chassid and a real Rebbe. And he said, I'm not going to tell you who the chassid is, and I'm not going to tell you who the Rebbe is. That's what Friedrich Rebbe said. It's a real story. And he said, the chassid comes to the Rebbe, and he tells the Rebbe about this dream. And the Rebbe just looks at him, very sad, just sad eyes. Doesn't say anything. The Rebbe just looks at him. So the chassid felt terrible. Like, clearly, his Rebbe is not giving him, he didn't give him any hope. And there's no bracha. And he said he went home and he was miserable. He had a miserable Rosh Hashanah and a miserable Yom Kippur. He's miserable. He's waiting for the shoe to drop. And he's sitting there on Simchas Torah morning, and everybody's dancing, because that's what Jewish people do on Simchas Torah. And he's sitting in the back, and he's depressed. And he says to himself, what am I doing? Simchas Torah today. Simchas Torah today. What am I doing? And he pulled himself out of his melancholy and his depression. He went and said L'chaim, and he danced his head off. He said, Simchas Torah, I'm going to dance. And the story goes that the day after Simchas Torah, the Rebbe called for this chassid, and he said, I don't know what happened yesterday, but the clouds have lifted. Meridika story about the power of joy and the power of Simchas Torah. It's a Meridika Maisa. So, the story tells you, it affirms everything we're learning here. There is something about dreams. Sometimes we could change. Sometimes we can't change. Destiny is destiny. We are not necessarily going to be able to change our destiny. What we get to choose is how we deal with our destiny. But if a destiny is a destiny, you don't get to choose your genes. The genes are what you're given. And this is true on many levels. So because of this, and I was telling you the story with this non-Jewish, he's putting his hands on people's head to bless, right? And he said he puts his hand on this one teenage girl, and she has an absolute fit. A fit. He says it's a new girl in this parish. She goes crazy. And it happens a few weeks later. So he pulled this girl aside. He said, listen, young lady, I'm not going to bless you if you don't. We're like, what is going on here? And he said, what he heard from her is mamash chilling. She said that I was abused by my stepfather. And the abuse always used to start when he put his hands on my head. And she said, the moment you put your hands on my head, it triggered me. It just put me back to that place, and I couldn't function. Right? So we're talking about the person is doing the same thing for everybody, but for you, maybe the hands of your faith leader on your head is a good thing. And for that person, it triggered them and drove them crazy. In other words, it's just a muscle. When I was learning this Gemara, I reminded that story. How do we receive things? We receive things differently. So did they say the same thing? Yeah, they said the same. They heard the same thing. But they themselves, Abaye and Rava, understood that if they heard the same thing, especially because as we learned before, that there's this thing that dreams will come in a familiar frame. It's not going to come in a frame of what you never thought about. So it's coming in a familiar frame. If it's coming in a familiar frame, so then it's going to come within the words or the milieu of something that you heard already. So that's how it's coming. That doesn't mean that has the same meaning. They understood it doesn't have the same meaning, and they didn't have this intuition. Because they didn't have this intuition, they knew that they have to go to somebody who does have that wisdom, who does have that art. Who was he? And that's Bar Haddaya. So this is the story. And they thought, by the way, Rava and Abaye thought initially that it had nothing to do with payment. That Abaye's message was a positive message, and Rava's message was a negative message. Now it's interesting that here Abaye gets responded to first. In the next case we're going to learn, Rava gets responded to first. In the subsequent cases, Abaye gets responded to first. But the Gemara tells us that it was Abaye and Rava who came. Abaye vir Rava. So why did he respond to Rava? Why didn't he respond to Abaye? So one of the Mefarshim says like this. He says, Bar Haddaya thought that he was going to get Rava to start giving some money. So he focused on that. Because I know Abaye paid already. I'm going to try to get this, try to milk some money out of him. And then when it wasn't working, so then he just devoted his attention to Abaye, and that's all. That's where it switches. But again, like I said, Rav Adin Even Yisrael says that this is like a thing that takes place over time, and it's a... Anyway, this is how we have to this is what's going on over here. Okay, so now the Gemara says, another time, a new time. Amr Lei, they came to him at a different time, and they said, Akrinon, it was read before us, Bonim ubanis toilid. Now, Bonim ubanis toilid means that you're going to have sons and daughters. That sounds nice. You're going to have sons and daughters. Yeah, but what does the rest of the pasuk say? But the rest of the pasuk says, you won't have them ki yelchu b'shevi, because they're going to go into captivity. So you'll have sons and daughters, but they'll be taken from you. Now this is, it's when it says v'goymer, so we have to understand that the rest of the pasuk certainly applies over here. So l'rava amar lei Kivishuse, they're going to be taken captive. Your children are going to be stolen from you. There's a bad future. There's bad things in the offering. Kivishuse. And kivishuse means, Rashi says, kivishuse is literal. No, where did I see kivishuse? Oh, the Marsha. Marsha says that it means literally. It's literal. Now, of course, you can ask the question, why here did he suddenly interpret things literally? So the Marsha answers, and the Tzlach answers. A cow he didn't have, children he did. So therefore, that negativity he saw. He said, that's, you heard what it is. That's the meaning of the dream. La Abaya Amar Le Abaye, he said, B'noch u'b'nosach nefishi. You're going to have a lot of sons and daughters. You're going to have a very big family. Ubenasban benosach la'alma umedanyan ba'apach kidika ozlim b'shivye. He says you're going to have a very big family, a lot of children, and because you're going to have a lot of children, you're going to marry your daughters off to other people, and it's going to be as if they were taken into captivity. And the obvious question, what's that have to do with a lot of sons and daughters? If your daughters get married to somebody who lives in a different continent and then they leave, that's not kishivya. Like what does it have to do with the big family? What's the banim ubanis? So the Marsha asked this question, and the Marsha gives a very interesting answer. The Marsha says that in those days it was common for children to continue to live with their parents. That was common. In the beginning, children lived with their parents, oftentimes moving into the same house. I once heard from an older woman who grew up in a shtetl that's how she remembers life. She remembers living with her grandparents in one house. That was normal. So he says, if there's going to be a lot of sons and a lot of daughters, who is going to end up living in mom and dad's house? He said, the boys will usually live with their parents, and the girls will go with their husbands. So if you have a small family, so then you'll have room for everybody. A son and a daughter, you have room for your son and daughter. If your daughter wants to live, she'll be able to fit in there. However, if you have a very large family, he says, so your boys will take up all the rooms, and because of this, your daughters will have to move out. And because your daughters move out, it's as if, euphemistically, as if they were taken into captivity. It's a euphemism, right? So he saw something positive. He saw a positive element of how this could be viewed, or how this could be skewed in a positive way, and that's the interpretation that he gives. Now, with regard to the idea behind the envisioning of things in what we're going to call this literal way, right? They're going to have many sons and daughters, and it wasn't possible to say that you're just going to have to Abaya, you're having many sons and daughters, which is very nice. Because it says V'goymer. V'goymer means etc. Means you heard the rest of the pasuk. And the rest of the pasuk was that it could be taken into captivity. Now here's an very interesting question. Later on, we're going to hear that he when it comes to the other negative idea, like shercha tavuach, he gave it euphemistically, right? But when it comes to your children being taken, he said that this has to be in a very literal way. So the Marsha gives us an additional insight into this. He says, Bar Haddaya understood that if there's an army that's coming and slaughtering everybody's cows, it's happening to everybody. It's not happening only to Abaya or to Rava. And he lived in the same town. He says it's going to be an invading army. If the army comes in and takes everybody's livestock, everybody's losing their livestock. But he says it's possible for a person, especially in those days, to have to face off with some kind of enemy who could come and literally take somebody's children, kidnap somebody's children. It wouldn't mean everybody suffered the same fate. It would be something specific. So when it came to Sharcha Tavuach, Marsha said they want to give it a general thing because the general thing would implicate everybody. That would be a very broad message. So he gave it to him in a euphemistic way. But here, that it could happen literally in a direct fashion that would only affect him, here he was comfortable going ahead and making a statement like that. And that's why That's le'amar le'kipshutei. This is another one of the explanations that people give. Now, the idea of shercha tavuach, the idea of your ox being slaughtered, is also understood by some of the Mefarshim as a euphemism for the concept of what we call mazalot. Shor is one of the mazalot. So let me just take a moment to explain. Before the Mabul, before the Great Flood, which stopped a lot of things, it didn't just mean Earth was the entire galaxy. Everything stopped. Everything came to a standstill. The heavenly bodies moved. The Earth, the atmosphere changed. The stars went at different speeds afterwards. We have this tradition that once upon a time, before the Mabul, when people looked up at the sky, due to the heavenly movements, every month the stars would arrange themselves in a different image, and the image was obvious. Not like the Big Dipper image, with if you connect the dots, it looks like this. Like, think about it this way. Every civilization, to the best of my knowledge, has the same zodiac. From the Far East to the Aboriginals, they have the same pictures. The same pictures in the 12 months. How did they end up coming with the same pictures? How did they end up connecting the dots in the same way? Yes, there are dots. The hunter has these dots, and Capricorn has those dots, and Taurus has these dots, but they're just like distant dots. How did they all come up with this? So our understanding is that once upon a time you actually saw these images. It was an obvious thing. It wasn't just a few dots to be connected. They saw an image of a bull. They saw an image of fish. They saw an image of a sheep. They could see it. And incidentally, this helps you understand why in the days of Enosh, where the people started to worship the stars, because they actually saw images in heaven. It made sense to them that there was a power, some kind of image in heaven, and they saw that based on those images, started to worship those images. Said, yes, there is a God, he's too far away. Instead, the mazalot are in place. And there is an element of truth to mazalot. So Taurus is one of those images. And therefore, when he said, shercha tavuach, why shercha tavuach? So the Maharsha says that's the farm animals. That's the natural thing. But some of the other Mefarshim suggest that the mazel, and this goes very much with the idea that there's like different mazels. Each person has different mazel. That the mazel of the shor, which would have been a euphemism for the concept of parnasa, was tavuach. So the mazel, your system is broken. Your system is broken. Now, when it comes to mazalot, we have this idea, like for example, in this week's Torah, or I'm just going to share with you, the Alter Rebbe talks about the euphemistic meaning of the floodwaters, and he says the challenges of life are there for a purpose. Ultimately, if you go into the Teva, if you find refuge in the words of Torah and Tefillah, then the challenges of life can uplift you. Vatorah misateva, it uplifts you. But otherwise, if you're not protected, if you don't have purpose and mission and meaning in life, you get inundated and overwhelmed by life, and you're not able to function. Okay, so why is it this way? Why does life have to be challenging? Why does life have to be challenging? Why? And the answer is because in order for life to be most meaningful, Hashem makes it challenging. The challenges make us rise to the occasion. That makes us great. That's we could accomplish in this world what can't be accomplished in the other world because of the challenges. And Alter Rebbe starts giving an example. He says Yisr ha'or mitoch ha'choshech. This is a paraphrasing of Ecclesiastes, where Shlomo HaMelech in chapter 2, verse 13 says that the virtue of light is brought forth out of the darkness. And this idea, which in Pnimius HaTorah, there's a lot of discussion of Yisr ha'or mitoch ha'choshech. And Alter Rebbe says this means that there's a skafia, and quoting the Zoharic terminology, that you have to sometimes force yourself. You have a craving, a lust, a desire, a fear, an anxiety. You have to force yourself not to be overwhelmed, not to be controlled. You have to do what's right. You have to have the discipline, and ultimately it leads us to, that positions us to be in a position of ithapcha, of turning something around. So if you are frozen by fear, if you have anxiety, and somebody throws fear into you, so you're going to be crushed by the fear. But if you are able to instead crush the feeling of fear, and you can utilize that circumstance, that not only it shouldn't bring you down, you use it to find new strength. And that goes from iskafia to ishapcha. This is Zoharic terminology. It's the idea of avodas Hashem. Okay. So the Alter Rebbe gives a practical example. He says a person is involved in his business affairs all day. In his business affairs, he feels like he's calling the shots. He's in charge of. He's like his acumen, his strategy, his hard work. He's in charge. He's making things happen. And we know, of course, there's a famous Medrash Rabbah, Ein lecha esev milmata, she'ein lo mazal milmayla. That there isn't even a blade of grass that isn't being communicated with constantly from a higher satellite, so to speak. Just like you say, if your cell phone is working, what is that a sign of? That there's a signal that's being beamed. There's a constant beam of a signal that's coming. The satellites are working. The antennas are working. The signal is coming constantly. So there's this thing called mazalot. And there's a pasuk, which is found in the Parshat Brachot. It says, Umi meged tvuos shomesh, umi meged geresh yirachim. And the understanding of this pasuk is that the sun and the moon, so to speak, become representation for the mazalot. And of course, we call the astrological imagery, the zodiac, mazalot in Hebrew. That's what it's called. So there's a spiritual system. And the spiritual system is that the mazalot are mikabel from ayin sarim. It says there are 70 princes, ministering angels. And the 70 ministering angels, every nation, it says, has a ministering angel, has a malach. You know, like so Rav Adinev in Yisrael puts it beautifully. He says every country has a certain societal mores. The French are French. The British are British. What are Canadians? I forgot. we have a shtick. We have shtick. And you have obviously different kinds of people. But there's certain things, they're from this country. And every country somehow develops a different culture. People have a different style. Some countries are more aggressive, some countries are more indifferent, some countries are more passionate. Where does this come from? It says there's a mazel. There's a line. It's coming from a higher place, coming from a deeper place. So the mazel gets from the ayin sarim, and the sarim are getting from what's called shmorei efanim. Efanim in Hebrew literally means a wheel. That means that there's a level in heaven of what we're going to call atmosphere, atmospheric reality, atmospheric pressure, so to speak, spiritual atmospheric pressure. So there's a whole system, a whole spiritual system in place called Shmarei Efanim, and in the words of Ecclesiastes 5:7, it says, Gavoya me'al Gavoya. There's higher and higher and higher. There are many causes. So we know that they're down to the cost of retail cost of items in the store or on the street, as they say, that's influenced by a lot of other things that are going on. Right? That's why really smart investors are looking at what's causing, what's going to cause, and what's going to cause of the cause, and they'll try to invest in a certain thing. Of course, they have no way of knowing the future and whether or not that'll pan out, but that's at least the theory. That's the science of the investing, to figure out how there's going to be these broad effects. And what happens is that big global events ultimately translate down into the little events here in our everyday life, and that's a metaphor. That's a metaphor for a spiritual reality. So the mazel means that Bar Haddaya said to Rava, there's something going on, the system is broken. Shoycha tavuach. He says, because shoycha tavuach, he wasn't just talking about he said the message really is that the system is broken on a higher place. And because your parnasa, your mazel of where the parnasa comes from, because that is tavuach, because that's slaughtered or broken or dead, that's why it's not going to come down in this world. That's why that's why you're not going to get the parnasa. And sometimes when a person is having difficulty with parnasa and they do a mitzvah or they give tzedakah, and all of a sudden like a new portal of bracha opens up, and where did that come from? And the answer is that by doing these little things, you can sometimes fix something in the system in a higher place. So this gives us a little bit of a perspective. The words the Gemara uses are very precise and very exact. Whether Bar Haddaya had a sense of the mazel and the deeper realities, for Abaye was one message, for Rava was another message, can come in exactly the same words, has totally different meaning. It's an art form, this whole business of interpretation. There is a certain truth to it. How does that fit with the payments? How does it fit with if you do pay or if you don't pay? How much control does Bar Haddaya really have? And are we able to control outcomes by virtue of something as simple as giving the dream interpreter a tip? These are questions that remain unanswered. And Bezrat Hashem, over the coming episodes, as we'll comb through story by story, detail by detail, narrative by narrative, we will come to a clarity and an understanding, Be'ezus Hashem, of all of these things. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help us. And since we speak about dreams, I'm always reminded that Galut is like a nightmare. So the nightmare should end. And it should be Hayina Kecholmin, and we should have an end to the difficulties, the travail and the challenges, and we should see the fulfillment of our greatest dreams, the coming of Mashiach, b'mheira u'b'yameinu speedily in our days. Thank you all for joining. Thank you for joining online. Please subscribe if you haven't, and share. And keep on coming. A gute Nacht. Laila Tov.